I was given this tiny glass of wine, and the guy said, "Can you guess the vintage?" Napoleon had drunk it on St. Helena whilst imprisoned there.
What?
And then suddenly the penny dropped, and I went, that's the year Mozart died.
Yeah.
As a wine person, I'm always asked two questions. What's the oldest wine you've drunk, and what's the most expensive? To which now the answer is the same wine. And you can buy half a bottle of it today in central London for £30,000. So essentially 60 grand a bottle.
2, 1, roll it.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. My guests today are Mel Jappy and Joe Fattorini, and together they built the most watched wine show on earth. The wine show aired in 110 countries and has been seen by over 250 million people. Mel is the BAFTA-nominated executive producer behind it, with 9 years at the BBC and credits including Who Do You Think You Are and Heston Blumenthal's In Search of Perfection. She started her career as a solicitor, walked into television as a MasterChef contestant, and ended up running the show. Joe is the presenter The Guardian called the Attenborough of Oddbins, philosophy graduate, 14 years as wine correspondent. This is a conversation about how a show about wine is actually about something else entirely. Joe, Mel, tell me a story.
The story starts with a Yorkshireman in a bath of red wine in the Atacama Desert.
It does. I am that bald Yorkshireman.
You're setting the tone perfectly.
Yeah.
It was. And it starts a long time ago. I mean, this was in the noughties.
No.
It was in the noughties.
No, it was 2014.
No, but I was in the bath.
Oh, right, in the bath.
You're getting the relationship
Right,
already
okay.
here. I was in Argentina in the desert and in a spa, and somebody said, "Would you like a treatment?" And I said yes, and sat in this bath of red wine. At which point, all wine people will say, "What was the grape variety?" Because it's a very winey thing. I can tell it was Bonarda. And I took a very speculative decision. I filmed myself in this bath of wine, talking to the camera, and uploaded it to YouTube, which was only a couple of years old, and completely forgot about it until about 2015.
2014. It was late 2014. I got this call. I was in a terribly bad mood on the day I got the call because I was working for a company. I better not say which one it was, no. But it was not going well. And these two people called me. I now know from Russ's Bentley Continental with the roof down. So I now know that. And they said, "Oh, we've heard that you're the person to talk to about making a TV show about wine." And I just said, "That's a terrible idea." and there was this silence at the end of the phone. And I went, and they said, "Why?" I said, "Well, do you seriously think nobody's ever thought about making a television show about wine before?" They went, well, there isn't one. I said, "No, there's a reason." "Well, what?" I said, "So a good glass of wine looks exactly the same as a bad glass of wine. And television is a visual medium primarily. Mm. And so unlike food, which is what I was at that point known for, that works with the lizard brain. You know, we all look at a piece of toasted cheese and go, "Oh God, that looks great." Melted chocolate, cheese pull on a pizza, all these things. You know, Nigella Lawson's become she lives and breathes this kind of imagery and words. I said, but it's very hard with wine. And the whole thing had been rather ruined by people in the 80s and 90s describing wines using
wheelbarrow loads of ugly fruit, the famous phrase.
Oh, all this bullshit.
Oh, really? That
right?
was a phrase?
Yeah, or it's like opening a new tube of tennis balls. Oh, fuck off. Of course it's not. And we can come on to the semantics of wine later. But and there's sort of this terrible disappointment on the end of the line as I kind of ended the call. And then the next day, I was literally in the shower, don't visualise. And I thought, oh, well, what if we treat wine like we treated the celebrity in Who Do You Think You Are, which was a show that I'd been involved with quite heavily. And was
that already a hit?
It was already I'd been on for 10 years, I think, by that point. Yeah. So I was very familiar with the mechanics of how that show had come about. And it was another show that my boss at the BBC, who wasn't the person that commissioned it, but I'd worked for BBC Learning, had been really down on and thought, no, who's interested in genealogy? Nobody would be interested in documents and gravestones and things. But, as with all great factual television, it's never about what you think it is about. And particularly, Who Do You Think You Are was not about dead relatives in the way that the wine show is not about wine. It's about great stories. And wine is a filing system for everything from entertainment to religion to culture to climate, personal stories, immigration, war even. We told millions of stories.
Was that always the ambition that you would reach far and wide?
Well, it wasn't at that moment standing rubbing conditioner through my hair, but I did have it was like a tuning fork, you go, oh yeah. And I called them back straight away and I said, look, I think I've got an idea. And they went, oh great, come and see us. And then the reality of it was, right, we now need to make the show. And they had a suite of presenters. Got a lot of flack for the direction we did go, obviously, 3 white men. But anyway, and I take full responsibility for that. And then I pitched them my idea, which was we don't talk about the wine until the last minute. We talk about the big story. So we literally had a whiteboard with the great themes of the world. And then we distilled it down to what the wine story would be. The most important thing was who's going to be the guide in this journey. And there were a lot of wine personalities out there in the market, as it were, but they all had a kind of image. And I wanted somebody new. So I was literally trawling through YouTube looking for people. And it was a most soul destroyer. I really did think I'd made a massive mistake. And then as I was watching this incredibly dull interview between some wine journalist and a winemaker in Bordeaux, I think it was would be, wouldn't it?
It would be.
Some red trousered thing. And then on the side, on that, you might like this section on YouTube, there was this 4x3 badly cropped, out of focus video that was entitled I'm in a bath of red wine.
I've seen that video, and it is exactly as it sounds. People need to go online and check it out themselves.
We'll
It's still there.
sure.
But that's quite the segue. And also what you're describing of that almost beautifully antithetical to what the perfect closed-off shot from the expert in Bordeaux to Joe in the bathtub.
Yeah, that's never what you look for. And it was, when I clicked on it, and it's only like a minute or 90 seconds or something, and your connection with the lens, which is such a talent, and you can't be taught. I don't believe it can be taught anyway. And I thought, and then I searched your name, and there was another much more polished piece.
It was sort of better.
Yes,
it was in the Yorkshire Dales.
In the Yorkshire Dales, and and I just thought, this is my guy, and then I tracked you down on Twitter, and pick up the story.
When you found me, remember you said, I said, what did you enjoy? And you said, I like the way you spat the wine out into the flower bed.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm there, sort of tasting this wine, and I better not get drunk. And I sort of hoik over into the flower bed, but it was slightly Keith Floyd in a sort of way.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, there was that kind of and very natural.
I was at home. I wasn't a TV presenter, and I got a Twitter direct message one night, and I was a wine merchant, so I ran a sales team in London, and actually that became a thing because I remember I asked you sometime later. I said, "Why did you not choose somebody who was a sort of master of wine or who's some qualification?" And I remember you said something along the lines of, "Yeah, but they're kind of like a Jedi Knight. They live in this rarefied world." Actually, most people, like tens, hundreds of millions of wine show viewers, the wine person they meet is somebody who's in a shop. And suddenly the penny dropped. The persona I had to adopt was just to be a bit like when I was at the Right Wine Company in Skipton, and somebody comes in and you go, "Oh, right, you're having roast lamb. Well, you want to try this, but I tell you, there's a funny story about the winemaker."
Yeah.
And you could adopt that. So I got a Twitter DM. We met the next day.
Yeah, I didn't have any time to waste because I'd already booked a crew to go to Burgundy,
which
in
was
like
within
10 days. Yeah.
And so I remember being delighted because the penny dropped that I'm divorced, and my ex-wife had the children that weekend. And I was like, oh, thank goodness for that. I don't have to arrange childcare. So we piled off. And in fact, it was doubly good because you pay me a bit of money, and I remember splitting it 4 ways and giving it to the children to go and buy their Christmas presents. So
really?
They had the first, sort of really nice post-divorce Christmas for the kids.
I didn't know that.
Do you feel that? Do you feel in a way did it become you? Was it almost purpose built around you in the first place.
I'm amazingly lucky. Lightning has struck twice for me in my career. And my very first career was an academic. I taught sociology. I did this MPhil on the relationship between food, wine, and religion, which I remember at the time thinking was literally the most useless degree anyone could ever do. Bizarrely, if you then go away and make this TV program, it's the best degree you could have ever possibly gone and done.
Arguably the only one.
Many of the things, I remember we did an episode about sake in Japan, and I was literally getting out my old thesis and going through and reading up the notes because we'd sort of done it. And I am vaguely obsessed with sort of burying myself in things. I was really lucky because then Melanie rings up and we go away and we have lunch, and I could have never made this show. I mean, I know the stuff. But between us, I think I got better. I couldn't produce a show now, but I think by the end of season 3, I'd learnt so much about how do you massage this into a compelling narrative, and what do I just not talk about? You had a lovely rule, and I quote this. I mean, I do 60, 70 wine tastings with people a year, and I almost always quote this thing that my producer, Melanie, told me, that I was never allowed to talk about anything that you couldn't taste in the glass. And that's one of those things...
Wow.
Wine people endlessly talk about stuff that you can't taste. Oh, the soil comes from the Paleozoic era or something. Actually, if you only ever talk about something you can taste, it becomes immediately relevant to people. But I had to learn that from you, and I think it was our partnership.
Yeah, I think that's because as a subject, it is so arcane. And as I say, I think there's lots of disservice done, particularly in this country, to wine. Wine around the world, in Europe particularly, is part of life much more than here. We have a totally different relationship with wine in this country. We didn't make it. It got imbued with a snobbishness, and if you couldn't taste like 6 things in it, it somehow. And of course, people become very confused. And you say, I think you can't ever really taste more than 3 things in wine. It's ridiculous.
Science is about 3 or 4 is the absolute maximum. No human in the world can detect more than 3 or possibly 4 liquids. Now, if I tell you 6, you might not know that fact, but subconsciously, you kind of get that I must be fibbing because... You can't do it, and lots of people can't do it. One of those things,
anyway, why does it matter?
It doesn't
the
matter.
only thing that matters is you like it.
Do you like it? Do you not like it? How do you use it? A lot of the time, why do people enjoy wine? Because they want to relax at the end of the day. It's probably the number one reason people enjoy wine. They want a bit of a treat, the sort of L'Oreal because I'm worth it moment, because they're with their friends.
I always used to say, people used to say, oh, I do like wine, but I don't know much about it. And I would say, do you like cheese? Yeah, I like cheese. Do you ever say I like cheese, but I don't know much about it?
It's a brilliant comparison. I'm definitely that person. I've lived most of my life saying if I definitely had the time and means, I would love to learn it. It's almost like I said,
why do you feel you need to? I just genuinely don't understand that. There are as many cheeses as there are wine.
I love the fact that you're basically saying, look, we distill it down into the reality check on the product and what this is, but you're delivering it with such passion. You're contextualizing it in about place or geography or circumstance or history in a way that is simply brand new news for most people. So we all end up repeating tiny little quotes and clips to others as though that's our little factoid that we're merrily taking along. Now, for me, that's genius storytelling.
That is, we're all here because of the stories we tell.
Yeah.
And, having those little facts and stories is about human interaction. That's how we all grow, isn't it?
The first English sparkling wine was made by an elderly guy, a Scottish guy, Bill Carkery. And I remember everybody wanted to talk about the winery and the grape varieties and so on. I wanted to talk about the fact that in 1978, he made 600 bottles of wine. He sold it out of the back of his car to the Dorchester. It was the first time anyone had done this. And I remember talking to him and said, you should be very famous for that. And he said, no, I'm much more famous for something else. And I asked what? And it turned out that he guarded the Queen of Tonga at the coronation. And actually, if you go and say to somebody, this wine tastes of XYZ and it's made with these grape varieties, there is a group of people for whom that's very attractive. If you say this was the first people who made English sparkling wine in the sort of modern era, and the guy who made it had guarded the Queen of Tonga at the coronation, it really resonates with people. And I'd had this career I had written, and I'd made a little bit of TV, but I'd mostly been a wine merchant. And I remember as we were doing the bits, there was a thing years ago, I'd done some staff training in Manchester. I can even remember who it was with. It was a woman called Rachel Mack, which is brilliant. If she's listening, hello, Rachel. And they were trying to sell a grape variety called Pic-Paul de Pinet. And lots of staff had gone in and had talked about this freshness and stuff. And it just wasn't sticking. And I said to her, do you know what? On the one side of the vineyard in Pic-Paul de Pinet is the largest nudist club in the world, in Europe, that was it. And then she said, what's on the other side? I said, it's the largest swingers club in the world. And 2 weeks later, I went back in the restaurant and I could hear her. She's very Liverpudlian, she would talk like that. She says, you know what? On one side of this vineyard is the largest swingers club in Europe. And that matters to me. That really resonates with people. And it's nothing really to do with the wine.
When I ran a football media business for many years, we had billions of views and we never showed a single kick of a single ball because we didn't have the rights.
You couldn't have the rights,
But the best compliment we ever received was people coming up and said, I don't like football, but I bloody love watching you. And there's something in that, isn't there?
Yeah, when Stu Heritage said, the first line of his review in The Guardian was, I really wanted to hate this show, but I couldn't.
I love that. That's a great opening to a line. Tell me more about this depth, though, because I'm very intrigued by this right now. It's like, where would you place your bets to a young person now?
But I remember at school, I was 10 and I had a wine textbook and I was obsessed with this.
Really?
Now, nobody thinks that's weird if you're a tennis player.
No, I get that.
And I think what we are fascinated by, and this is where subject matter experts is when they're completely consumed by this.
Geeks are very attractive, for all kinds of reasons, And
now you have this sort of wine geekery. What makes you better is, and I have to say this, is if you find somebody like Melanie who goes, okay, I'm now going to make you an accessible geek.
It was wonderful.
Because you do need
because I didn't know anything really at the beginning. I knew basic grapes and things, but I also came at it from a position of kind of open book. I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's always the best way to start anything, is not knowing what you don't know.
Absolutely.
The biggest problems I've had working with presenters is that, it's natural that commissioners and things, they want the expert on a subject to tell it. Now, that's fine if you're making Gardener's World and you've got Monty Dunn. I want to know the absolute right moment to prune my hydrangeas. And I want, I want that level of expertise. That doesn't kind of work so well when you are going on a journey to discover something, because that expert, by their nature, wants to display their own expertise. So expert presenters sometimes find it very hard to put their own egos in a box. Joe always found a way.
Is there ever then creative tension? I mean, you riff kind of beautifully and it seems quite hilarious, but does that ever get genuinely tense? Is it good to have good creative tensions, or is it actually always
I can genuinely say the only time we ever had an argument was when I got you the wrong size trousers.
It was. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking of the moment
Furious.
when I had the wrong size trousers. And it was the only moment, I think, when I became genuinely
Pretty sure you told me you were a 30-inch waist, but anyway.
I was quite diva-ish, and I look on that
proud,
moment with
proud
great shame to this day.
Mel, when did you know you had something special? Was it like show number one, scene number was it immediately, irrespective of viewing
I was
numbers?
fairly confident. Well, it was difficult until you actually put it together. You know what I think was the actual moment I think we've got really something special was when we came back from Chile and we cut that trailer.
Yeah.
Yes. Or Carl Peckerso cut it actually to that M2 soundtrack.
Yeah.
And that was for investors, and we showed that for investors. And I remember, it didn't matter how many times I watched it, the hair on the back of my neck stood up.
If anybody wants to watch it, it's cut into a clip on YouTube called The Best of Joe Fattorini.
Yeah, it's there. And that's when I thought, this is different. I've never made anything as good as this. And then our fabulous celebrity cast as well.
We had this marvellous moment once. We filmed a part of one of the series in Berry Brothers and Rudd in central London. And it's got this beautiful old shop. Yeah. And after we'd finished filming, when I came out at the end of the day and opened the door, and this lady, it turned out a Vietnamese lady, collapsed backwards into the street, slightly squawking, making quite a lot of noise. And I ran across and I said, "Are you all right?" And I was trying to get her out of the way of the taxi, at which point she sort of jerked away from me. Anyway, he got her out and I said, "Are you okay?" And she was completely stunned. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "I've come from Vietnam. because I really enjoyed the wine show. And as I was taking a photograph of the place where they filmed it, the presenter walked out and she nearly passed out. And I think that was
By the way, how good is that?
it was just bizarre. And I think then people found it quite difficult to imagine. I talked to somebody the other day, actually, and I don't really sell wine, and he was sort of saying, what are you doing? And I had various things, and he said, you could never really go back to it because you're now a distraction. You go in,
Of course. I think I ruined you in that way.
But that poor Vietnamese woman example, I mean, no one's ever going to believe her either.
No,
her
absolutely.
trip to London to
Yeah, no,
see the
it would have been better if Matthew Reeson had walked out with you. That would have been
even better. Yeah.
I had a moment when Dopped Matthew Reese and Kerry Russell on the red carpet at the Globes or the Emmys, I can't remember which. I think they were up for the Americans. And he said, I don't want to talk about that. Tell me about the wine show.
Isn't that lovely?
And I remember going, oh my God.
What's your take then on either the genre or that making work like that? I know, for example, Joe, you almost do a physical embodiment of parts of this show back in your home of Sweden, for example. Like, people require this right now, don't they? The connection. Wine at its essence connects people.
I thought about this the other day because Scott Galloway had this extraordinary line. He said, my advice to young people is the damage to your liver of drinking is nothing compared to the damage essentially to society of you not going out and having a drink. And we do... When we look at it, we never really touched on this, but I was always vaguely aware there's the famous drunken monkey hypothesis that, drunk monkeys eating rotten fruit is what created early hominid societies. It's created this way that we could build enough trust and indeed exchange to live in ever larger groups. In fairness, we've been drinking lower, this is 11%. That's quite a lot. Most of society we've been drinking things like 5-6%. But that's made us. The drunken monkey hypothesis says that creates who we are. And to walk away from that and to live in these atomized virtual worlds where you're not coming together. Wine is built for conviviality. A wine bottle is designed for two people to go and drink. Was it Churchill said that the Magnum is perfect for two as long as only one of you is drinking? And there are variations on that.
That's a terrific quote.
But the wine bottle. When somebody asked me last year, they said, "What's the perfect wine to have for Christmas?" And they were expecting me to say some Bierzo or something, and I said it's the largest format bottle you can find of the most minimally acceptable wine.
That's great.
Because then, apart from anything else, everything's better with a big bottle. But I can pour to everybody from the same vessel around. And it's almost Christian, that.
I love that. That in itself, it's like this literal physical bringing together of people in a way that we almost took so much for granted.
I always have this thing that it's not that I don't think that snobbery in wine exists, but I think we are bathed in a narrative that, Robert Cialdini has that idea of pre-suasion. I think we pre-dissuade people by going, of course, wine's terribly snobby. Actually, wine's not snobby at all.
No.
It just comes with this strange caveat.
It's the most preferred alcoholic drink in Britain. In every region of Britain, in almost every age group in Britain, you're more likely to find a bottle of wine in a British fridge than a packet of butter.
Wow.
So nobody ever goes, those people at number 28, they eat butter. They're up themselves, But actually, when we made the show, what we discovered was that particularly on Instagram, and when we did the Show's Your Bottle thing, what we found was it was completely normal, ordinary people who like to drink a bottle of wine in front of the telly. But the greatest thing we discovered there, it was a bit of a hashtag, and so we were trying to get that sense of community. So we said, show us your bottles. Now, there's an amazing thing that appeared. We didn't know this. People would photograph the bottle of wine. They would hold it out in front of them. But they would try and get the screen of the TV in the background. It was very nice if there'd be Matthew or, James.
Yeah.
But then we suddenly noticed that they all had their feet up on a poof or something. And so we could see their feet. And then we suddenly noticed you could see their slippers. So we then had another one where we said, we put a picture up and said, we've seen all these slippers, so show us your slippers. And thousands of people sent us photographs of their slippers, and they were, I remember there was one pair and they were pheasants. They had these enormous pheasant slippers. But it was a real insight for me Because when we think of somebody tasting wine, you think of somebody in a room and they're spitting it out and they're taking it very seriously. Actually, most people are drinking wine with their feet up on a poof wearing pheasant slippers.
But you're basically describing community.
Yeah.
Did it feel like that when at its, if you like, peak, and perhaps still now when you go out and speak to people, or perhaps people recognise you, or you're at your events? Was it the community that basically kind of...
Yeah, definitely. I would say, and I think this is something that we should all think about in the atomized world we live in. The size of the audience doesn't necessarily mark its success. And so, yes, we did have a massive global audience when the show was being distributed. But for me, what was the most important was the size of that truly passionate audience. And there's still groups on Facebook and things which still exist today, wine show fans who are still talking to each other and still very engaged with the show. And
Susie and Jane will watch this. Hello, Susie and Jane. And they will, and I talk to them every day.
Really?
Every day.
I love that.
Yeah, and then I know that all the talent, Dominic and Matthews and James, they get asked about the show all the time.
That's nice.
And lots of people...
Did that love and that community, did it make you feel proud?
Oh, hugely. Yeah. I mean, I've been very fortunate in my career. This, without doubt, is the show which I would make again in a heartbeat.
Really?
And I'm the most proud of this show, partly because I didn't think it could be done. And a lot of people said to me it couldn't be done.
And I think if you are a subject matter expert and you've got this kind of expertise, you may not make enemies, but you might not please your friends. And you've got to have that confidence. Somebody once said, how are people going to take to you when you go back to, the UK and you've told that story when essentially the wine story was 3 chateaux up, And I said, well, they're probably going to hate it, but I'm just going to wear that because my duty is not to half a dozen people in a private members wine club, in central London. It turns out it was to like 100 million totally normal people. And it was easy for me in a way because in the back of my mind all the time, my mental picture was that I was in the right wine company in Skipton and somebody had walked through the door and they wanted Sunday lunch
That's awesome.
wine. And you have to, it was like a little persona that's in my head.
Yeah.
And we had this amazing thing. I remember you saying that we couldn't have a Master of Wine because you would be this sort of Jedi Knight. And one of the first things we filmed, I think it was Carl set this up. He got Matthew Rhys to come out and he went, "It's Obi-Wan Kenobi." And I immediately became this sort of Jedi Knight.
Yeah,
very good.
That was
it's a
quite funny.
decent pun. But if you mentioned, I know it's been now a couple of years, but I think, we're in an era really of people are calling it interest media rather than social media. But what it does do is it's this notion of kind of catalogue and long tail is suddenly back with a bang. It's why people like me are sat watching clips from TFI Friday, which are 30 years old, on TikTok, and finding myself fully engaged all over again and being lost down various wormholes. And that's probably for the music, but actually it was for the vibe. And would you make it the same way if you were making it tomorrow? Would there be any adaptations that a very modern 2026 feels like?
I don't know. That's a really good question, and I haven't asked myself that. I was very mindful at the time that because of the commercial model, it needed to be evergreen.
Yeah.
And so I never wanted to do anything that was very of the moment. We never did anything hyper topical. I was very, very aware that this show would need to live for a long time because, the way that distribution works is that you don't recoup immediately. It's about the long tail, and particularly in the unscripted world, it's about racking up sales, albeit them getting smaller in tariff, but you're still selling the show. That was always on my mind. Essentially, it's a magazine show. It's in the same model. We got a lot of people comparing it to Top Gear at the time. That was never the intention. It did sort of, I was very flattered by that. It evolved into something hugely different, which was really, again, not about cars. It was about friendship. It was about 3 guys and the world and telling stories.
And they do stand up. And your point about evergreen is very true.
Yeah,
and
I
the
think you
clips
can watch
see
it
now,
today. And you
100%.
wouldn't, I mean, other than some of the restaurants we featured are closed, but you could absolutely watch it and get as much out of it and still
really
Google the
believe that.
wines and find the wines.
You can sometimes you think, oh, should we be topical? So we weren't particularly topical. There was an episode we made in Argentina, and it was about the story of Malbec. And Malbec is an immigrant, essentially. It's a French grape variety that became something very different. And in the Argentines call it Malbec because it's their sort of native. And it's written into the Argentine constitution that you welcome migrants. And so there's this sort of free entry, access into the country. Now, in a sense, that's a timeless story, except that the day we filmed that, and I do this bit at the end about, how people and things move to new places and become something very different, was the day that the first Trump administration had a big clampdown on...
Well, Donald Trump went into the press room at the White House and said he was going to ban Muslims.
And that was the day you...
The day before. It was the day
Isn't that
before
the day
we
before?
filmed that. And I remember being really, really unsettled by this and upset. And
it's a live story today.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and we
Still
were
a-
there, and we finished the main bulk of the shooting in the vineyard, and we'd shot the asado and everything. And I said, right, come out here, Joe. And you sat on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, let's get to the essence of what this is about. And we were about half an hour before we got there. And I remember, as you said, the best stories the best things happen when people find a new home somewhere else. And I just burst into tears.
Oh, what a great line.
And I just thought, that's what this is all about.
It's still
I know, it
affecting,
still makes me-
Melanie today,
Yeah.
And I know it sounds awful. Somebody once jokingly said that it was a good episode if one of three people cried. The presenter cries, the contributor cries, or the producer cries.
That's your metric.
Did you ever cry? I can't remember.
And I did a couple of times. I remember I cried after I ran the Medoc Marathon.
Oh, yeah.
I remember I shed a tear in Georgia. Georgia is the birthplace of wine. 8,000 years ago, people that we believe they made it there. And Georgia is a country, the alphabet, their writing system is reputedly modelled on the twisted gnarling form of grapevines.
Really?
And there's a lovely story we had there. I'd read it in a lovely book. They would sew a little vine cutting into their armour just over their left breast, so that if they fell in battle, the vine would root and it would grow through their heart.
Wow.
And you realise that this was a country that's completely consumed by wine culture. And we had a little piece to camera at the end, and I had to deliver it very precisely as the sun was setting.
The sun was setting over the mountain.
And we got to the end of it, and I remember shedding a tear then because it had mattered sort of so much.
And also
to go
with
there.
that, we went to this Supra, remember?
Supra.
Which is like a Georgian, talk about storytelling. Gosh, Supra in Georgia is a dinner at which people sit around the table with all the fabulous Georgian food. Georgia is at the sort of heart of the Silk Road. So you've got all these influences from Asia, from Europe,
Amazing.
from Persia. It's an incredible melting pot. And the Supra is a dinner at which people just randomly stand up and tell stories.
Yeah.
And then they sit down again, and then somebody will sing, and then the music will start, and the wine will flow. And that was,
How wonderful.
I remember being really moved that night as well by just the emotion of the whole event.
I'll never
It
forget,
was
I said,
incredible.
what does supra mean? And he said, it's a word for a tablecloth. I said, because you put a tablecloth down? He says, no, because the food is so generous that you can't see the tablecloth.
Yeah. Their wines are really so interesting. I mean, some of them are fucking awful. But that's the only place I've ever been told by a winemaker that I just didn't understand the wine.
Yeah.
I said, well, it smells of dog fart. And he went, yes, you don't think you understand this wine.
Yeah,
I
there
was
we
like,
go. Wine
oh,
snobbery exists.
I do.
does
It
exist.
really does smell
Turns out
shit.
wine snobbery
Yeah,
beyond
yeah,
the British
yeah.
Isles.
Yeah.
So
but
that was Georgia, and that's a beautiful story. Come on, where
I would,
else?
I would love. I think everyone should go to Georgia once. It's
Give us some
incredible.
more colour geographically, other places, Joe.
Moldova
What
was-
took your breath
Moldova.
away?
Moldova was a great story.
Moldova was a great
not the
story.
story we thought it was going
No.
to be.
What did you think it was going to be?
Well, we knew that Moldova is, per head and per acre, is the world's largest wine producer. And it's a tiny country,
Really?
but it was essentially turned into a winemaking factory by the Soviet Union. And it had been very much involved. Stalin had decided that because champagne was a great symbol of the West, that every Soviet citizen should be able to enjoy champagne at their birthday. So he produced this product, Champansky, in vast... I mean, they have the world's largest and second largest underground cellars that were made to go and accommodate these.
You can run a marathon inside the cellar.
Inside the cellar. They're absolutely vast.
All built by slaves, of course.
And we'd wanted to, and it was with Carl, who has this amazing eye for the sort of visuals, and I think he'd been watching, I think, is it GoldenEye, the Bond film?
Yeah.
And there's a bit where he's going into this sort of broken down yard, and there's all the Soviet statues that are all ambling. He said, is there somebody a bit like that? And our local fixer, he said, no, I'm not sure really, but he said, I'll take you to this place.
No, he was in full denial that there was any communist
He didn't want-
iconography
yeah, there wasn't
left in
anything.
Moldova. He's like, no, we are very European. We
rock up at this car park, and there's Joe Stalin and Lenin and Marx,
Trotsky, everyone.
they're all
the
there.
big names.
there.
And we said to him, we'll come back and film here, in a couple of days. And he said, no, it'd be great. He said, nobody ever comes. It's just a few old communists come and have a cigarette.
This
at
is
the
on the
weekend."
back of him driving us into Tbilisi from the airport. And saying, here are the gates of Moldova.
Gates of Chisinau.
The gates of Chisinau.
Yeah.
Oh, right. What happens here then? Mostly people, they just come here to kill themselves. Okay.
So bleak. And we came back up a couple of days later, and the place was heaving. There's just thousands of people. And in the middle of it was essentially a communist parade for
Red Army.
8-year-olds. It was sort of kids. And our crew, they were amazing. And the camera guys, they were sort of fearless. They just ran in and started filming. And
it should be said that the reason we went to Moldova was that the Putin administration were punishing Moldova at the time. They had fabricated stories that
it was mercury. They said there was mercury in the wine.
Mercury in the wine, and this wasn't. This was to kind of. This was to punish Moldova for looking west. There's a lot of people in Moldova who believe Moldova should be part of Romania, ethnically Romanian, and the Romanians obviously wanted to be part of Europe. So there was the young, particularly amongst the young. So we got there to tell that story, but when we arrived, there was nobody who would admit to that being true. And people were really reluctant to say on camera that they were being punished by Moscow, which really surprised us. Nobody would speak. And so, we had this young fixer saying, no, we are all very European here. And then we turn off at this park, and here it is, literally full of the people in Red Army uniforms. Yes. Anyway.
And I'll never forget, you asked me to, I did a piece of camera. And as we were preparing, they had an old, original Second World War Red Army hero, very elderly man with all the medals down to his knee. And I said to the fixer, what's he saying? And he said, he's telling the children about his experiences of the Second World War. And he's saying how much joy it gave him to kill Germans. And I said, you mean Nazis? He said, no, he's talking about Germans. He's now saying how much joy it would give him to kill Angela Merkel. And so there's this complete indoctrination. So Melanie says, very quickly, roll. So I start talking to the camera, and I said, if you think that this is a country that's turning towards the West, look at this is completely different. At which point this bear of a man barges in. I have to give him something. He had a television presence because he looked straight down the lens of the camera. And I don't know, he said, quiet, you motherfuckers, quiet, no speaking, you bitches. I think.
Yeah. Needless to say, it was like in the highlights reel.
I end up looking like sort of Father Dougal and Father Ted. I suddenly turn on this kind of a bit awkward kind of face. Yeah. And you sort of said, I think we better step away.
Yeah, let's go. But that was also where we set up this amazing shoot inside the cellar with the head of marketing for one of the biggest wine companies there, who then said, I must go to marketing meeting now. And we're like, well, we're just about to turn over. And he went, no, I must go to marketing meeting. So we showed ourselves around, including Goring's wine collection.
Yeah. Does Vladimir Putin have some there?
Yeah, and it was very proudly displayed.
Wow. And you did see the problem that they faced was that it's one thing to go and turn towards the West. It's another thing to have a kind of Soviet mindset that says, no, at 10:05, I go to the marketing meeting, irrespective of the fact that I could now go and talk to an audience of 100 million people over here who I'd quite like to sell wine to. And those were really revealing moments. That was one of those stories. We thought we could tell a story. Actually, we showed it. It was a show don't tell.
We totally told a different story to the one we thought we were going to tell.
And I guess that comes back to near the start when you were describing the first thinking around the show. It really reminds me of when I worked solely in a passion like football, but we never showed any football, like I mentioned. But it was all about the sights and sounds and smells and places and people. The late Anthony Bourdain did it brilliantly, didn't he? So
Totally,
often
the
through,
best. He's
I
the-
adored what he
Absolutely
used
the
to
best.
do.
Totally agree. People keep telling me we're moving from an attention economy to an intention economy. God, I hope we do. I feel, the way that television is funded now makes it incredibly hard to do what we did.
How explain for those who just the briefly.
Well, as I say,
how,
we were fortunate to have some very passionate, generous investors who probably never seen their money back. But I hope it gave them some joy to be part of it. But, there just isn't the money in the normal old legacy television model to make shows like this. So then you think, well, where can I go to find the money? Well, we can go to brands, we can go to tourism organizations. Yes, they do have budgets. You're sort of creating patchworks of funding. But I feel that there is a lot more scope for companies, corporations, brands to really be brave in this space. Every company in the world can tell you what their values are in 30 seconds. There's very few companies or corporations can tell their story in 30 minutes. And they just don't have the architecture. They just don't have the emotional resonance. And they don't really understand that what they can create is another asset to put on their balance sheet. And I think I instinctively knew this when we were making the wine show.
But what you're describing is true. Every brand worth their salt right now, and frankly for quite a few years, will tell you, we're all about storytelling. Yeah. Now, we'll all trot down to Cannes Lion in about June and talk about the various awards that people have won. And a few brands will storytell brilliantly.
Absolutely.
But it is a few.
Yeah.
The rest is probably a bunch of tactics and mechanics and things that, frankly, are marketing moments that might catch fire and uplift some sales. But they're not really a part of the fabric of culture. In fact, most younger audiences likely ruthlessly filter them out.
I remember in series 1, Carl Prekeza and Melanie and I all discovered we were all reading John Yorke's book, Into the Woods, at the same time, totally independently. And what really struck me was that we were taking the telling of stories very seriously. We were going away. John, I think, has done an amazing service to go, look, this is not just a bit of a flair for it. And it's not a very easy formula. It's quite hard and it's complicated. You need to think about it. You need to study it. There's an enormous value in that. Businesses, and wine is a long way behind, but businesses generally need to catch up and go, no, these people are they're putting value on our balance sheet here. This is a real asset. And, they're not looking and going, that's essentially what Red Bull does. It's flavoured fizzy water with an amazing story at its heart. And my favourite wine advertisement, and it's never been bettered, I think it came out in about 1962, 64, by a guy called Howard Gossage, and it was for the Paul Masson Wine Company. And he said that collecting wine is cheaper than cars, quieter than hi-fis, and tastier than stamps. Nobody has ever topped, and essentially that's a story in an ad. And nobody has ever beaten that amazing way of distilling.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Into, and I think now people will try and tell you all sorts of things about wine and everything, but actually that's why people want to go and enjoy drinking wine. And we need to go back to being able to. I'm a great Gossage fan. I think he told brilliant stories, and he was particularly good on wine stories. But we've lost some of that essence of going back and and he used to punish himself trying to think about how to tell those stories.
Yeah,
Of course, it was Robert Thurkel that I
Robert
went back
Thurkel,
to as well.
Very early
I'm
on.
a huge fan of him.
Very early on in the show, and the technical side of it, Melanie
Gave you a book, didn't
gave
I?
me a book, and it was Conflict by Robert Thurkel. And then I remember you saying afterwards that you rather regretted it, because at one point there was a line where he said that television presenters are powered by the twin fuels of anxiety and arrogance. Great. And I could then tell when you were turning one of those dials up or down, So if I was getting a little bit cocky, then Mel would go, there's other people I could ring. And if I was having a sort of crisis of confidence, she'd go, this isn't really the wine show, it's the Joe show. It's all about you.
Oh, that's good.
But you have to have structures. You gave me a really early structure. We were presenting ideas. And me as a wine person, my idea would always be we should go to that producer because they're very highly respected and the wine is delicious, neither of which translate through the lens of a camera. And I remember you said, I'm only going to allow you 3 sentences to pitch ideas to me. And they have to follow a structure. So the first had to be a question. The second had to have 2 numbers in it. And the third had to paint a visual image because it's a visual medium. And we sat there and we were somewhere across in Kensington, and I said, have you ever wondered what those black bulls are on the side of the motorway in Spain? At which point you went, I have actually. I mean, it was sort of slightly weird. And I said, well, there are I think there are 85 of them. And they are up to 17 metres tall. And they're an advertising hoarding for a wine Osborne Veterano. And I said, they're such a Spanish national icon that in the film Jamón, Jamón by Bigas Lunas, the protagonist and antagonist fight naked to the death under one of the bulls until right at the last moment you think that the antagonist is going to win, and lightning strikes this bull and the testicles fall off and hit him on the head. I remember you going, you turned to the rest of the crew and you went, that's the perfect pitch. We may not make that
we never
show.
Did.
We never did,
Why
but it's a
didn't we
really
do
good
that?
pitch.
We never did that one.
And I use that.
Still in the list,
That's
yeah.
great.
We do need to have those. Sometimes, you have those little disciplines, and it's a bit like Oulipo. You sort of constrict yourself and you create something much bigger. And my most viral ever Instagram post, and I'm not somebody who tries this, when I just said 3 sentences. I said, what's the correct number of bottles of wine for a picnic? Because there is an answer. Because we get the word from the Picnic Society, founded in 1801.
This is good.
Made of old French aristocrats.
Fattorini.
This is good.
And in their rules, you had to bring, each person bought 1 main course and 6 bottles of wine.
6.
So the correct number of bottles is 6. And I thought, what's the visual image? And I got out a picture, and there's an old lithograph, and it's just dozens of completely smashed French people all falling over themselves and dancing. And people love that because it's a story. The story has to start with a tension. What's the correct number of bottles of wine for? Well, I'm not leaving till I know what the answer to that is. And those were some of the skills you taught me really well. And I that was what I came away with. Otherwise, I'd have just banged on about what shabbly soils were. Or something. How big is the problem? When did the problem happen? And can I picture the outcome in my head?
And a kind of beauty, I guess, in the show and really the way you deliver it is people like me seem to learn so much. And these almost set piece like history lessons here and contextual points there. Give us an example of some of your favourites, or perhaps went down particularly well with some of the audience.
But my favourite, actually, I think it was the first thing I ever tried. When the show came out, somebody said it's such a pity that Joe didn't do a compare and contrast of Sauvignon Blancs from New Zealand and France. And then I looked at what we had done, and in fact, Stuart Heritage picked it up. We'd gone to South Africa.
That's such a great comment.
And we'd picked grapes from the Van der Constance vineyards.
And 4 o'clock in the morning.
4 o'clock in the morning, and people all singing in Kosa. I can't say it, but they've been singing in the sort of vineyard. And then I was given this tiny glass of wine, and the guy said, "Can you guess the vintage?" And I remember thinking I was terribly clever, because as we come down the stairs, I knew that Van der Constance was one of the great wines of the world, and it had this extraordinary history. And I'd seen a bottle of 1826 on the shelf, and I thought, maybe he's opened this thing. So I sort of rather cleverly, I was 1826, and he revealed it was the 1791 Van der Constance. Napoleon had drunk it on St. Helena whilst imprisoned there.
What?
And then suddenly the penny dropped, and I went, that's the year Mozart died.
Yeah.
Hold on, this is phenomenal.
Yeah.
This is incredible.
So there's this wine, and
They hadn't opened it for us, by the way. Do you remember what happened? They dropped it.
dropped it. And
Somebody
so-
had dropped it, yeah.
So it had been a smashed bottle,
And they'd managed to sort of, as it had dropped, it had cracked, and they'd managed to get it into something,
Yeah.
and then sieve it so that we
sieved.
could drink some.
Imagine being the person who's dropped the 1791.
Oh my God, I know.
There's all sorts of things happen. I've drunk the same wine from the same barrel of the same year as Napoleon, which is a
I
bizarre
love that.
thing.
And it was
And
fresh, wasn't it?
It was still fresh. It was
So
still
come on,
beautiful
how did it
drinking.
taste?
It had this gorgeous nose, aroma and taste of raisins and currants, and not currants. It was more nutty and honeyed. And you can buy half a bottle of it today in central London for £30,000. So essentially, it's 60 grand a bottle, sort of equivalent. And that really was one of those that was an extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
The amazing thing about it, wine people wanted me to go and do a sort of basic intro to wine, and nobody wants that. What they really want is this incredible story. And for me, I know we don't like the Top Gear analogy, but it's Jeremy Clarkson driving the Bugatti Veyron. You won't get to do it, but I'd like to see somebody do that.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm sorry if I'd have drunk the same wine from the barrel that Napoleon had, I'd probably never stop telling that story.
I do tell it quite a lot.
Yeah,
It's
it was.
bloody
It
brilliant.
was. I got to have a tiny taste as well. It was really beautiful. But interestingly, that wine then you could buy the current vintage for about 30 quid a bottle. I think I saw it the other day. It was like 90.
I know.
It's like
It has gone up an awful lot since we
it's
made it.
really-
And it's a very nice, and actually that wine, and you can tell story in lots of ways, and the bottle shape, they recreated the bottle shape that you would have had certainly in the sort of early 19th century, and it has this rather wonky shape because when people blew bottles, they would stand them and the glass would still be slightly molten, so it would sort of sink down unevenly, and so they have this sort of uneven bottle. Jane Austen wrote about it.
Yeah, it's one of the only wines mentioned in Pride and Prejudice, I think. And
A salve for a broken heart.
I love where you frame it like it's an actor or a cast member. Oh, they also appeared in. You do though. It's brilliant, which is pretty much where the show idea started.
It's very fortunate. When we made the show, there was a resonance with some of the stuff I'd done as a journalist, as a sort of writer. It's rare in a way to go and get somebody who goes, I'll let you sort of run with that. Because what you have to do, you have to disrupt what people slightly expect the format's going to be. You know, good stories, they don't go the way you think they're going to. And years ago in Scotland, I remember we were sent some wine, some Bordeaux. And the people said, could you taste this with a group of wine enthusiasts? I think they thought I was going to go to the Mulgai Wine Society or something. And I remember Tom said, no, we're not going to do that. We went to the Press Bar in central Glasgow, which was next door to the Salvation Army hostel.
Wow.
And I looked and he said, they're wine enthusiasts. And the most amazing thing is we tried wine with these guys who had the most extraordinary insights. They were quite diligent about what they thought about it. And I suddenly realised, because these are the people who live in a world of probably rather more complex smells than the rest of us. I mean, there's something about it where you go, it's maybe ethically suspect, but you have to have the wrinkle. What's the wrinkle in the story that you're trying to tell? I'm going to make a wine TV show. The first thing we're going to drink is a 30,000 half bottle wine that Napoleon drank. Okay, now I've got your attention. I'm going to taste some Bordeaux with the homeless.
That's awesome.
I think that was, for me, it really felt slightly like I was in my happy place. I mean, I really felt part of.
Well, we could have done the story of Buckfast if only you'd asked.
If only I'd asked. We could have done this.
You mentioned it's such a great example, and people are going to continue to love that for years.
Yeah, I hope so. I'd love it to come back. I don't know
Not just
whether
that you
it
and
ever
I would
will,
love it.
but
Once a week, I'll meet somebody who'll say, when are you bringing it back?
Yeah.
Karlskoga next week, I've got between 70 and 90 Swedish people, and I guarantee 2 or 3 of them will say, when's it coming back?
The good stuff rises,
Yeah.
and appropriateness for times is everything. And
Yeah.
it really wouldn't surprise me whether it be on the back of a conversation like this or another that.
I don't know, this takes us down too far of a cul-de-sac. The title
Yeah.
was a mistake.
Yeah.
What should it have been?
Anything but the wine show.
Yeah.
Literally
Notice it's not
anything.
the car show, it's Top Gear.
Yeah.
I was weirdly about to ask that. Yeah.
And the word wine is a problem.
Yeah.
And at the time, I just didn't have quite enough leverage in the business to be able to say, no, it's a really bad idea. Whereas if it had been 2 blokes and a corkscrew or 3 blokes and a corkscrew or travels with my barrel or I don't know, anything, Joe Fattorini over a barrel.
And, you're talking about the sort of notion of taste. One of the joys of wine is that you can find your tribe. There's a natural wine tribe, there's Bordeaux tribes. It is also, the problem of wine is that anything that's inclusive necessarily has an out-group.
Yeah.
And the discourse around wine is that we often focus on you belonging to the out-group rather than the potential to be in the in-group. And that's where a lot of that sort of tension sort of comes. People go, oh, well, wine, it's for those sorts of people. And you say, well, do you drink wine? And they say, yeah, so what do you like? So, well, you're a Rioja fan. You're in that tasting group. I'm sure that there is a potential for wine to be very inclusive and to say, no, you in this bit here, you're in that bit. The problem with using the word wine is that people go, I'm not one of those wine
Again,
people.
it comes back to that, the cheese analogy.
It's the
you know,
cheese.
yeah.
But that's what you have so successfully achieved. And maybe that's a lovely place to end, because when you produce and craft something like you did with someone presenting in the way that you do, you became a passport to explore other cultures.
I do hope so. I really do.
100%.
Yeah.
And even this conversation shows as such and proves as such. And some of those conversations, stories, anecdotes, little nuggets that I'm going to remember and probably retell and claim half as mine. But that's it. That's the beauty
That's what
right
it's all
there.
about.
And it just so happened that wine happened to be at the heart of that. Mel, Jo, thank you so much for coming
It's
in.
been a pleasure. It's been
really
really
has.
nice to reminisce with you.
If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram as StoryCoPod, subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. StoryCo is a Telltale Industries production. The producer is Jago Lee. It's recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios in King's Cross. Special thanks to Jack Freegard, Tyler Newton, and Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Please go out, tell a story that matters, and we'll see you next week.